Beta doesn't have decades of motocross identity baked into the culture the way Honda, Yamaha, or KTM do. What they have is a 450 motocross bike that entered production for the first time in 2024, and in its debut year, put two top 10 AMA Supercross finishes on the board with Colt Nichols and Benny Bloss. Nobody talks about that. Here's why they should. Beta has been building motorcycles for over 120 years. The company started in Florence, Italy under the name Società Giuseppe Bianchi, making handmade bicycles before switching to motorcycles in the late 1940s. What followed was years of trials and enduro racing and world-level results. Their trials bikes are ridden by champions. Their RR Enduro lineup is one of the most respected in off-road racing, campaigned across MXGP Off-Road, GNCC, WORCS, NGPC, Endurocross, and Hard Enduro. That lineage feeds directly into the RX 450. Everything Beta learned about building a motorcycle that feels connected and honest under a rider, one that doesn't fight you when conditions go sideways, shaped the philosophy behind their first ever 454-stroke motocross bike. The 300 RX 2-stroke came first in 2021 to test the water. Then Beta spent years developing the 450 in parallel through MXGP factory racing with riders like Jeremy Van Hoorbeek, Alessandro Lupino, and Ben Watson before releasing the production version to the public. This was not a rushed project. The bike you can buy was race tested at the highest level of international motocross before a single one hit a showroom floor. The engine, smooth, linear, and built around mid to top. The RX 450 runs a fuel-injected, liquid-cooled DOHC 4-stroke, a unique bore and stroke of 97.0 mm by 60.8 mm with a compression ratio of 13.4 to 1. Despite sharing some dimensional DNA with Beta's 430 and 480 Enduro engines, this power plant is its own thing. Different counterbalancer, different valves, different piston, no Kickstarter provision, and fuel injection and ignition timing tuned specifically for motocross rather than enduro. Here's what you'll actually feel on the track. The power is smooth and linear across the rev range, but where it really comes alive is mid to top. Don't expect aggressive bottom-end snap or that third-gear lug feeling that old-school 450 riders love. It's not that kind of engine. What it gives you instead is a broad, clean power band that builds predictably and pulls hard through the top end. That characteristic actually divides rider opinions. Aggressive B-to-A class riders who like to lug gears and use bottom-end torque to muscle out of rutted corners may want to rejet their expectations, or more accurately, revisit their gearing. Beta addressed this themselves for 2025 by switching to a 51-tooth rear sprocket from the previous 47-tooth setup, shortening the overall ratio and sharpening corner exit drive without changing the engine tune. If you're on a 2024, that's your first and cheapest modification. Go up 2 or 3 teeth on the rear and the bottom end feel transforms. The lubrication system uses separate oil compartments for the engine and transmission, a setup that's rare on modern 450 motocrossers and practically unheard of at this price point. It adds complexity to an oil change, but means your transmission oil stays cleaner, longer, and you can run the optimal spec in each compartment independently. The maps, TC, and handlebar controls. The RX 450 ships with 2 pre-programmed engine maps and 4 levels of traction control, all managed by a single handlebar button. The sunshine icon is your standard dry conditions map. The rain icon softens throttle response for slippery surfaces. Traction control operates only in first and second gear and intervenes subtly. In most conditions, rear wheel spin isn't aggressive enough to make it feel necessary, but it's there as a safety net when conditions turn greasy. What this system is not is complicated. You don't need a laptop to access either map. You don't need to pull the bike into a van and plug in proprietary software after every race. For most amateur riders, the standard map is where you'll live. If you want more aggression than either stock map delivers, an ECU tune and a slip-on exhaust muffler is the typical next step. Accessible work that doesn't require Beta factory tools or a dealer visit. The frame, steel, deliberate, and misunderstood. The RX 450 runs a molybdenum steel double cradle frame split above the exhaust port with an aluminum subframe. The moment some riders hear steel frame in 2024, they mentally dock points, because the industry default for MX bikes has been aluminum for decades, and steel reads as old technology. That reaction misses the point of what Beta is doing. Steel has more natural flex than aluminum. A steel main frame absorbs and damps small chassis inputs. The micro hits from braking chop, the instability of landing slightly off axis, the edge loading that happens in rutted corners before they transmit through the foot pegs, bars, and seat into your body. An aluminum chassis transfers those inputs more directly, which rewards precise riding but accumulates fatigue when conditions roughen up. Beta's decision to run steel isn't a cost-cutting move, but a deliberate engineering choice rooted in their enduro development, where chassis feel and rider endurance over long, variable terrain are the priority. On a motocross track, the effect is a bike that feels more forgiving late in a moto. Not slower, not less capable, just less draining to ride when the track is breaking down and the lines are getting rough. The geometry is balanced, not the ultra-short, twitchy setup of a 250, not the planted, straight-line priority stance of a stretched-out enduro machine. It holds a line through a berm without requiring constant correction, tracks predictably in ruts, and doesn't hunt at speed on the straights. Wheelbase sits at 1,485 millimeters with a dry weight of 104.5 kilograms, competitive with class rivals. Suspension, KYB components, real factory settings. The RX 450 runs KYB suspension front and rear, a 48mm air oil separate, AOS, closed cartridge coil spring fork, and a KYB 50mm rear shock. KYB is the same brand supplying Yamaha and Honda. This is not second-tier hardware. The honest caveat: the 2024 stock suspension settings were the most common complaint in early reviews. MXA and Dirt Rider both flagged the balance as needing adjustment from the factory tune, particularly the front fork feeling too low in the stroke. Beta acknowledged this and updated the suspension calibration for 2025 specifically to keep the fork higher in the stroke and improve feel over square edge chop. If you're on a 2024, Beta runs an in-house suspension team that can provide revised settings for your weight and riding level. Use them before you send the bike to an outside tuner. Here are your actual factory baseline settings from fully closed. Forks, 10 clicks out on compression, 14 clicks out on rebound. Rear shock, 2 turns out on high-speed compression, 26 clicks out on low-speed compression, 16 clicks out on rebound. Start there, then tune by symptom. Front washing in flat corners or braking zones. Check sag first. Set rear sag at 105 to 110 millimeters. If sag is correct and the front is still pushing, drop rear sag 3 to 4 millimeters to shift weight bias forward and load the front tire. If the fork is packing down mid-corner and going stiff, if you're too slow on front rebound, open it 2 to 3 clicks and re-ride the same section. If the rear is kicking over square edges, slow the rear rebound down 2 to 3 clicks from baseline and let the shock recover more gradually. On hard pack, stiffen low-speed compression at the rear 2 to 3 clicks to resist the sharper, more abrupt bump inputs. On soft loam, open it back up and let the shock travel deeper for better tire contact. The 2025 updates added a larger 22mm rear axle over the 2024's 20mm for improved rear-end rigidity, X-Trig FlexFix handlebar mounts that absorb vibration and raise bar height by 5mm, a smaller and lighter Nissan front brake caliper for improved feel and modulation, and updated engine mapping. If you're buying new, buy the 2025. If you're on a 2024, the suspension recalibration and a rear axle upgrade are worth investigating. The details that tell you who built this bike. Toolless seat removal. Push a button, the seat comes off. No tools, no fumbling mid-race day. That's a small thing that saves time every single time you wash the bike, check the airbox, or access the battery tray. Under the seat is a clean basket holding the battery, ECU, and relays in one organized location. The fuel tank is translucent at 1.8 gallons, smaller than most Beta models but MX specific, keeping weight central and cockpit ergonomics slim. You can actually see your fuel level without a gauge. Standard foot pegs are extra wide, machined aluminum with stainless pins. The kind of peg detail that costs money to execute correctly and usually shows up on bikes twice the price. Stock rubber is Maxxis, a real tire brand with a real compound, not the throwaway rubber some manufacturers ship to hit a price point. 4 throttle pulleys come in the box, different profiles to change the rate at which the slide opens relative to wrist rotation. If you want a more aggressive snap off the bottom, swap to a quicker pull pulley. If the power feels like it's coming on too fast and you're struggling with traction management, go to a slower pull option. That level of out-of-the-box tuning flexibility doesn't exist on most production 450s. Who the RX 450 is actually built for. Beta's own stated design target is the average rider, the person spending the majority of their time in the mid-range of the power band, not the factory racer pinning it to the rev limiter on every straight. That's not a marketing excuse for building a slow bike. It's an honest acknowledgement that most people buying 450 motocrossers are intermediate to expert amateurs who want to go faster for longer, not just faster for one lap. The rider who belongs on this bike is comfortable with their technique and wants a machine that works with them rather than demanding they rise to its level constantly. The rider who values feel over aggression. The rider who wrenches their own bike on weekends and wants straightforward maintenance, accessible valve checks, a clean EFI setup, and an engine package that isn't so tightly packaged it requires dealer tooling for basic work. The rider coming out of enduro or cross-country who wants to do more gate drops on a bike that doesn't require learning a completely foreign machine language. And increasingly, the rider who's done with paying a premium for a name and wants to know what else is out there. Beta's dealer network is the limiting factor. Depending on your location, the nearest Beta dealer could be a significant drive. Parts availability mid-season requires planning ahead in a way that Honda or Yamaha ownership simply doesn't. Aftermarket options are growing. Exhausts, mapping, suspension tuning knowledge, but the catalog depth isn't at KTM or Japanese levels yet. If you're in a metro area with dealer access, this is a minor inconvenience. If you're remote, it's a real operational consideration before you sign anything. Stock up on wear items at purchase. Filters, brake pads, chain, sprockets, and you eliminate most of the risk. The bike is not fragile. You're not going to be stranded waiting on obscure parts every other month, but you do need to be slightly more organized than you would be with a bike backed by a 50-dealer regional network. Horsepower comparisons between class competitors are close enough that they stop being the deciding variable for most riders. The RX 450 isn't giving up 10 horsepower and hoping the chassis makes up the difference. The power is competitive. What's different is how it's delivered and what it costs the rider to access it consistently across a full moto. If the Beta impressed you with what a production bike can do on a budget, wait until you see what $250,000 actually buys at the factory level. Every system on a full works factory Supercross machine, the engine, the suspension, the chassis, the electronics, broken down in detail. Next video, go watch it.